Hey there, Wargamers, Justin our Painter here, and today, let's paint some Battletech. I'd like to welcome you guys back to the channel, and as promised, I'm going to attempt to do some tutorials when I have time, and today we're going to work on painting this Battlemaster here that Bobby provided from Fortress Miniatures and Games, and we're going to be trying to have it match closely to this box here. Now, quickly, before we get started here, big shout out to Fortress Miniatures and Games for sponsoring the channel and helping keep this content flowing. So if you're interested in anything Battletech related at all, check out Fortress Miniatures and Games. He's got everything you need, from paints to minis to other things that aren't Battletech at all. So if you're interested, check him out. Now, today we are going to be trying to work on this Battlemaster, and we're going to be using some of the Army Painter speed paints that Bobby provided. Now, in front of us here, we've got High Lord Blue and Cloudburst Blue, which are these two colors, and that's very dark. We've got Blood Red and Slaughter Red, which are these two colors. And then we've got Fire Giant Orange and Speed Paint Medium. Now the orange isn't out here because that's in here specifically if we get to the canopy. I want to be able to blend it a little bit so we can get a transition. Now that said, on the box here, we've got blue, we've got a white stripe here, and then we've got the, red and white, and then we've got the cockpit. I didn't want the red cockpit to be the exact same as the red stripe here, so I figured, mixing a little bit of orange in with the red, we might get a nice transition on the cockpit. Now, my thought process with these colors, with like the blues, is I felt like those swatches would cover a variety of the blues in between here, especially if we use a little bit of the medium to adjust the opacity. And then the same with the red. I couldn't quite lock in a specific red because they're both super duper close when we hold it next to the striping there. So I figured if we use a little bit of both, we might get some nice transitions and blends. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the painting today. We're going to be using, again, the speed paints and a little bit of the medium. So we're going to start off by trying to block in some of the blue. So let's go ahead and get the red and the oranges out of the way, and we'll get our blue paints here prepped. Now what I'm going to do is start off by playing with the opacity a little bit on these. Now, you have to test this out for yourself and see what you like. I'm going to start out with a 2-to-1 ratio of the speed paint to medium and see if I like the opacity. This may be something that I have to adjust on the fly. And I got 6 drops there, and see how I like it. I noticed on the swatches here that in particular, this blue here, the Cloudburst Blue, was super duper dark. This one was hand painted, this was airbrushed, so I really wanted to adjust that opacity. I wanted some of this dark blue, but I really needed to show through on this lighter area, and right up here was bright white, and it was still super dark, so I figured adjusting the opacity might help. And at a 2-to-1 ratio, that's about a 50% dilution there, so to speak. So we'll see if it's too much, I add a little bit more paint. If it's not enough, we'll add a little bit more medium. And I've got 6 drops of paint to 3 drops medium. And then we've got this blue here. We're going to try the same thing. This one, I suspect we may have to add a little bit more paint, considering it already showed up pretty well here. But considering this right here was hand painted and that was airbrushed, I wanted a bit more of this blue than that one. So I figured adjusting the opacity might help a little bit. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and come in here and mix these up. Now, if these paints happen to mix together, it's not the end of the world here. So we're going to start with the lighter blue. I'd rather it, if it gets mixed, anything get mixed with the darker blue versus the other way around. So we'll do a quick swish of a paintbrush here, and we'll mix up that darker blue. Now this is still super duper dark. So what I'm going to do is, and this is a thing that I think is a good tip for you guys, I'm going to start by spraying a little bit on, or not spraying, but painting a little bit on the base here where it was hit with some primer. And actually looking at this, this was a secondhand model that I re-primed. It's got a little texture to it, probably from the initial prime that someone else did, but this should still get us through in terms of what we're trying to do. So anyway, we're going to come in here on the base, and we're going to do a little bit of a pull of this speed paint. And that's going to give us a rough indication of the dilution, because that's a white base roughly, and if we can see through that, we're fine. So that looks reasonable. Let's go ahead and grab some of the other blue, and we'll come to the back side, and we're going to cover this up with basing at some point anyway, so this is a good place to test that's not on the model. And I like that. That looks plenty bright. So now what we're going to do here is we're going to start trying to determine roughly where we want our stripe. So it looks like it is on the left side of the mech. Whoops, just dropped stuff. Left side of the mech here. So when we block in here, I'm probably going to draw a straight line to try and get us kind of like when you're coloring between the lines, where you might do the border first. So we're going to come in and we're going to attempt to block in our border. So it looks like this is offset to the left side of the leg. So to make our life a little easier, I'm just going to come in here and we're going to use this natural point in the kneecap. And we're going to just try and, there we go. Try and block in here. And now we're not trying to do full saturation. We're trying to pull a straight line as best we can. This is going to serve as the area to not put paint. Like we're putting in the perimeter here for our blue, because we don't want to have to try and put white or red over our blue. So we're going to go ahead and create that border now. So we've got our first line here, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I got a little off kilter back here, but he's got a slight turn to his torso and his legs, so I don't mind that too much. Remember, this is your model, and you can visualize it the way that you want. The important part is to leave enough room on this side here for your other colors to go in. And in this case, we want to have the red and white stripe here. If you were to slide this over a little bit more, you might actually put another line, or to be the other portion of the stripe. But I think what I'm going to do is apply the blue right up next to it. So kind of use the side of the foot here and the leg to be the break point. So I'm not going to worry too much about doing a second line on the full model here. But we're going to go ahead and start by putting that line in areas that don't have the natural break point like the leg does. So we're going to come up here and try and envision how wide we want this to be, knowing that we're going to go with the kind of side of the kneecap right here as kind of the guide. So knowing that that's going to be roughly the break, we'll come here and we'll start to pencil in a little bit of the side border we want. You don't have to be super precise with this, but you want to try and have some elegance, so to speak, some precision, because you don't want the areas to be too saturated, because we're going to come in and fully saturate, and you want to have some of that transition still there, if that makes sense. And if you go too heavy or too thick and then you apply a second coat and it kind of overlaps, you might lose some of the details. So keep that in mind when you're working on this. And don't be afraid to rotate the model as needed to get a better angle. So we'll come in here, and the underside of him can be a little tricky, but we're going to try and kind of follow. And it looks like, on the picture that we have like a straight line, but in actuality, like this is angling up and over, and we're trying our best to take a 3D surface and create this illusion of that straight line. And I'm reasonably happy with that block in here. And we'll come into the back side of the Mini and do the same thing. All right, so we've got our line drawn down the back of the torso here. I did not do one down the leg. Again, we're going to use the side of his leg to be the break point and try and use that as our guide for what we need to leave unpainted or uncovered, so we can do the red and the white. I feel like my blue line here was not quite far enough to the right as it should have been, but not terrible considering his torso is kind of twisted and his left leg's kind of forward. Not the end of the world. I don't mind this being slightly off kilter because it kind of gives that illusion of depth of the model moving. And then here, with this kind of coming forward and that, it kind of lines up pretty nicely. So, and this is going to be the focal point of the model anyway. So as long as the front looks the best, that's good, because hopefully your opponent's not looking at the rear of your model as often as it is the front. The front is where all the pew-pew happens. So now we're going to come in here and we're going to do our best to do a little bit of blending, and we'll drop our paintbrush. We're going to start on the other side of the model here and work our way to the difficult precision part. So I'm going to grab some of our dark blue here. It's not High Lord, the Cloudburst blue. And we're going to apply some to the dark areas. And we're going to be moving as quickly as we can. And we're focusing on where the shadows would be. So the undersides of stuff. And again, you want to move quick with this. You don't want to give a lot of time to set up. You're trying to get decent coverage. Now, we're going to come in with some of our High Lord blue. And in those same areas, we're going to come in and we're going to, there we go, feather back and forth. Now remember, once you touch the dark blue, the lighter blue is already going to be contaminated, so you want to work to the lighter areas first when you're going to start to blend. Go down here to his foot. I'm liking that I thinned down this contrast paint, or the speed paint. We're getting a bit more opacity out of it, which I like. And I'm a big fan of the philosophy that you can always come back and add more paint. You can't come back and add less. And typically with that philosophy, you end up with a lot of glazing. But if you put on too much paint too quickly, you can't really fix it or remove it once it's on, you know. So I like to work under the philosophy that I can do a thin coat and work my way up. Even though we're working with contrast paint or speed paints, I'm going to mess that up quite a bit. Their functionality is very similar. I'm going to come in with a little bit more of that dark, get it right in here. I feel like it started to dry a little bit, and I wasn't getting as much of a blend as I wanted, so we're having to kind of work quickly here. Okay, and if you like this paintbrush I'm using, this is one of the synthetics from Monument Hobbies. I use a lot of their synthetics for work like this. You'll notice I switched brushes from my nicer brush to this synthetic one that I don't mind tearing up, and it is for that kind of grungy work. And this is the size 6 bomb wick, great for large surface areas and blending. I picked up this this technique from Sam Linz. He's a award-winning artist, and he uses almost exclusively synthetics. I don't necessarily agree with that, but he is a Golden Demon winner among other accolades, and I'm not. So who am I to speak to his interests, his tastes? And I'm going to speak to him anyway, because I was mostly just giving a little jab there, but that guy has got so much talent. He has proven that he can take a box of really crappy brushes from the hobby store and make a masterpiece, and that is not true of all of us. So I compensate for some of my lack of skill here with tools. And having the right tool for the job is important. And after talking with Sam Linz at Nova, it was right before COVID, so it was at 2019. He was talking about relying heavily on these synthetics. I went and tried. So not only has that philosophy actually worked well using the cheaper brushes to get good quality work, it's actually saved my nicer brushes, so I use them a little bit more sparingly and use these cheaper brushes for more grunge work. And I work on, currently I'm blending obviously, but I reserve my more expensive brushes for the more delicate procedures. So while he may be able to paint a masterpiece with a synthetic and I can't, I have to rely on my slightly nicer tools. Taking or adapting some of his philosophy was still helpful. And I think that brings back a quote from a friend of mine, Mr. Chris Adams. He told me once, there is never the way, there's always a way. And what works for one person may not work for you, and vice versa. So I like to take the critiques and the recommendations of others and see what works for me and what doesn't. So some of what I'm doing here may not work for you, and some of it may, and that's okay. And in this case, hyping up the brush from Sam Linz, because honestly, while I was saying I liked my my sables pretty nicely, I would not have tried these synthetics if not for him. And I picked up, I think I've gotten 2 so far. I think I've got one on my hobby desk here. Yeah, the little Sam Linz brush pack from Monument Hobbies, and you can see that this is the actual sables that he recommends. I haven't used those yet. They're still in here, but all of the actual, what is this, the bomb wick? So there's 2 bomb wicks. Yeah, so I pulled 1 sable and 2 bomb wicks out of it, and the synthetics have gotten way more use recently. So that has been a big boon, so to speak, to my I'll say boon, but it's helped save the pocketbook. So, but I digress. We have been rambling here, and as I was saying, we are coming in and we're just going back and forth. I'm not doing full coverage every time because I need to get to this stuff before it dries, and we are cleaning the brush quickly in between paints. So I'm doing a quick dip in the paint water and then wiping it very quickly on my paper towel, which is on my right thigh. That's where I like to keep my paper towel. It makes it really easy for me to reach down and rinse off or dry off my brush quickly. You may have to find a setup that works for you, but that is what I like. So I'll come in here, I'm gonna get a little bit more. And what I'm gonna try and do is, we've got that lighter blue down, we're gonna grab some of this dark blue and we're gonna come right in here. Right, and you see I'm kind of tracing where I want the shadows to be. And we'll just a little bit of a brush stroke there, but there's also some area where we had some kind of chalky paint from the initial prime. Like I said, this model was used when I got it. It was already primed and I had to change the color. I don't remember what color it was, but it was not white. So I had to change the color here. And you'll notice sometimes, that's a little thing that I probably should mention, sometimes I will come in and I will have a brush stroke or a little bit too much paint, and I will pull it across my thumb to get excess paint off the brush so that it's not leaving so much. So there we are with that leg so far, and you'll notice we're getting some nice dark blue here, lighter blue at the top, and trying to mix those together. So let's come in here and we'll fill out the rest of the model right in here, and this will be a good place to showcase some stuff, because this is going to be an area that is predominantly going to stay dark. This is the underside of the torso, obviously, and we're going to get right up next to our little guideline there, and we're not as worried about blending here because it needs to stay dark. So we're going to go for even coat. There we go. And now we'll grab some of our lighter blue and we'll hit the top. We'll try and pull towards us. So I'm going in and pulling back, and we're trying to pull towards the front of the model, and we'll get a little bit of mixing while it's still wet with that darker blue right on the edge, which is perfectly fine. If anything, we want some transition in colors here, and I'm trying to keep my brush strokes going the same way, so I'm not leaving any crazy lines in this. And if you find that it is drying on you, and you're starting to leave crazy lines or get tearing, finish up the areas you can quickly and then let that dry. If you have to come in and repair something later, that's fine. But if you start getting crazy tears or weird dryness in your paint, it's going to be no fun. You're going to kind of mess up the areas you were working on. So, but as Bob Ross would say, kind of my spirit painter, so to speak, we don't make mistakes. We have happy little accidents. So don't stress too much, especially when you're painting with this kind of paint. This is meant to be a relaxing paint. No crazy stakes. While you could win some competitions with some contrast style paints or speed paints in this case, which I know James Wapple, I think is the guy. When the contrast paints for Citadel came out, he was doing some crazy like non-metallic stuff with them. He's another example of an artist who can take a product that is designed for us newbies and go win a paint competition with it, right? So it's, for him, it's less about the tool and more about the skill. For some of us, we have to, we're using things the way that they were intended. He's using a tool in a different way. So he's actually won some paint stuff, I think, using contrast paints. For the average person, though, these paints may be more of a therapeutic, get your minis painted and ready for the tabletop. You're not as worried about a paint comp with the contrast paints, despite what we're doing here being a little bit, I think, more on the detail orientation rather than trying to just throw one quick coat of paint. We're actually trying to do some blending. So think outside the box, use the hobby tools that you've got at your disposal and see what kind of progress or detail you can get out of those. But the point I guess I was making with this while I ramble is that don't worry too much about the quality. Get it looking good for you. And sometimes being happy with good enough is good enough. I guess if you were worried about creating crazy good detail or paint competition, you might be doing a different style of painting, or you might just be, the James Wapples of the world who are just that skilled that they could take this paint and, work wonders with it. But I suppose the point I'm making is to be happy with what you're doing. Let this be therapeutic. Don't stress too much about winning in a paint competition. Do the best you can with it. And at the end of the day, if you get your mechs painted and they're on the table, that's what matters. At some point, we will probably do some content on the channel here where we have some more detail-oriented tutorials where I explain more of what I do with edge highlighting or airbrushing, but I wanted to showcase these speed paints, and if I'm honest, I wanted to see what I could do with them off the cuff. Like right now, I've not really done a lot with them, and I just started filming. I sat down, decided I was like, hey, we're going to film this today. I want to see what I can do, and normally I would traditionally have painted something once in a technique before I do a film session on it, usually. In this case, I am going straight at it. I have not practiced with this. We're just seeing what we can do. And my thought process is, if I'm able to get something that looks reasonably cool quickly without a lot of practice on this, I think that this product will work for you. I think you can do it. This is pretty simple. Now, I feel like it's getting a little thin at the top. Right in the bright white area, which is not the end of the world. If this occurs, you can come back in with a thin coat of it, a glaze, get your saturation where you want it to be, but not the end of the world. Probably just got a little bit of water in my paint. So, but moving on, we're going to go ahead and we're going to tackle his right arm, and then his left arm, and then we'll show you us wrapping up here, trying to do kind of some precision painting right next to this line here. All right, so I have had to do a quick cut there. I got to rambling, and I imagine if you guys are watching these videos, you probably enjoy listening to me talk about something, or it's nice background noise, but I was continuing to ramble while I was doing the same techniques over and over. So I went ahead and did a quick cut here so that I could get this area done quickly and not just continue rehashing and making this video longer, which I'm rambling now, making it longer. I went ahead and blocked in some dark colors on this side here, because this side is going to remain, for the most part, pretty dark. Using the zenithal highlighting that we did when we prepped the model, which if you're interested in that, I've got a video talking about zenithal highlighting, where you prep the model with a dark base sprayed into white or gray, which is where we started. I should have probably mentioned that when I started the video, but I sat down so excited to paint, I didn't even think about it. But I digress. If you're interested, you can watch that video or ask in the comments, and I will elaborate. But suffice to say, not only does that help us with our contrast or speed paint here, I'm going to keep messing that up, aren't I? It's also serving as a guideline for where colors should be. So the light source is coming from this direction down, and this side of his leg is still dark. It was darker than the white. So I went ahead and hit it with the dark blue, and there wasn't a lot of white showing through because there's no light hitting that area. So that remaining perfectly dark is fine, while this side is going to be a lot brighter. My light source is coming from this direction. So I went ahead and blocked that in. Now as we're coming in here, we're going to try and be particularly careful because we don't want to mess up our guideline here. So we're going to get up close as we can and try to, with some precision, get our colors in. And if we can't quite get it where we want it to be, we can transition over to a slightly more precise brush. I'm trying to do as much as I can with the less expensive tools, because I assume that if you're watching this and you're considering picking up speed paints, or you already have them and you're trying to use them, you're trying to hobby maybe either for speed or on a budget or both. And if I recommend you get a very, very expensive brush, which is a good thing to have, I'm concerned that I may be doing you a disservice for the type of painting that it is you might want to do. I don't mean that as an insult. I just think that that probably is true, and that you don't want to spend $25 on a single paintbrush if you're going to be speed painting a mini, right? I could be wrong, and if I do switch over to one of those brushes, which I probably will when we get to the canopy, I will explain what it is and why I use what I use. But in general, I feel like if we can do the bulk of this with this synthetic brush, that is a win-win for everyone, I think, especially financially. And also, it means a little less brush time on my more expensive brushes. Now, what I was doing here was I had a little bit of that dark paint down, or dark speed paint, and came in with our lighter blue and was just mixing on the edge and trying to follow that line, that crisp line we're trying to aim for. So now we're going to create a break point here at the top, at the waist. I don't want this this line to carry over the top. I think it's going to look weird. So we're going to have it stop at the waist here. So we're just going to block in a little bit of dark color right in there. I think that is going to be perfectly serviceable. All right, so we'll come around the back side here, and you can notice this is a lot darker than that side, and that's completely okay and natural. So we're going to come in with some of our dark blue, and we're just going to paint right up to the side of that line. And now I'm being particularly careful with the torso because our line guide on the torso is in a different spot than it is on the leg, so being a little cautious. Now I've filled this in pretty well with just the dark blue. We're going to grab a smidge of that light blue, and we're going to hit and just do a little quick mixing. It doesn't have to be as bright as the other areas, but I want to have a little bit of a transition, just a smidge. It's going to be a lighter, darker blue, so to speak. Okay. And that's a little subtle, but we do have a slight transition on some of the area there. So now we'll come in here, and we'll do the same. Again, trying to focus on the dark areas of the Mini and leave some of the light areas exposed so that we can use our lighter blue on those. Okay. And one of the things I picked up from another friend of mine, Teal Sakiri, Eric Bailey, Teal from Twitch, yeah, great painter. When I was struggling doing some wet blending with traditional paints, I was cleaning my brush too much, and I was live on Twitch at the time, and he said, "Justin, stop cleaning your brush so much. It's okay for your paints to mix." So that's one of the things I will say with this. Don't stress too much. I'll usually do a real quick rinse, and then I'll go back to dipping in the paint. And if they mix a little bit, that's okay. We're going to be mixing on the model anyway. That's perfectly fine. Okay. And I'm trying to be particularly deliberate with my brush strokes, the direction I'm going. I'm applying a very light touch here because I don't want excessive pooling. Now, some of the pooling is good for the recesses, but especially right here next to this line that we're trying to block in, I'm trying really hard to keep it crisp and not have a lot of blue getting over there. So right here, we're trying to tidy that up a little bit. And I fear it's not quite as clean as I want, but if we keep it as clean as we can, it's going to make our life a little easier when we come in with the red. And if we have to tidy up with a little bit of white, at least the lines are going to be reasonably crisp. So let's come in here and start working on this foot here, or this other leg. And now we got to be careful because we're using the side of it as our guide for our line. So trying not to go too far over because we need to leave some of that separation. And by guide, as I was mentioning, it's before, it's kind of using it as the natural break point for the edge of where our red and white lines are going to be, or pinstripes, I guess. I guess pinstripes probably would have been the smart thing to be describing these from the beginning, right? I think that probably would have been smart. So our guidelines next to our pinstripes. All right. So here we go. Again, now I'm trying to be clean and precise because we're coming up right next to where those lines are going to be. I got a little overzealous there, a little bit excited. It's my way of saying I may have had an errant brush stroke. Totally did right there. All right, so while that's still wet, I've cleaned my brush out quickly. We're trying to clean up as much of that excess paint as we can. And it looks like we've just smeared a whole bunch of blue, but not the end of the world. Just trying to clean that off. There we go. Okay, that happens sometimes. As one of the things that used to get me when I used to watch people paint is I would worry that they were infallible, but that does happen. I don't have some crazy view of my paint capabilities, but I used to worry that some of the guys I were watching were super good and I could never do what they do, and then they never made mistakes, and then I've totally seen some make mistakes, and it makes me feel better about myself. And I think that that is an important view for people to have, is to know that, like, no one's perfect. And if you happen to see someone who does a really, really good job painting something online, not only they have skill and they've spent a bunch of time painting it, if it's a tutorial, they probably spend a bunch of time practicing that and cutting together the best footage they can to convey the point. So don't beat yourself up over it. They're trying to put out a good product and show you how to do stuff. All right, so we're almost done with this leg here, and we're gonna come in, and again, natural guide point, which I think I've messed up a little bit because got sided, as we do. All right, so we do the best we can, and we may end up, I feel like I got a little too tight on the pinstripe. I think we may end up having to come in with a little bit of white and tidy up, which is going to be a little bit of a pain, but it happens. All right, so I think I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and finish up on his hip here, and then we'll move on to his arm. And then once the arm is finished, we'll come in and we'll start working on the red as well. All right, guys, so I have gone ahead and finished up the leg here and the arm with our blue and zoomed in a little bit so you can see the current state of the Mini, and left some of this exposed. I have determined that some of the areas I was not as tidy as I wanted to be, and I probably should have switched brushes, and I didn't. So we'll have to come back in with a little bit of white, and I'm not going to be using the contrast white for that because we need full coverage. So I'm going to be using a little bit of acrylic white. You could use probably anything, but I find that the Winsor Newton stuff covers really, really nicely, so we're probably going to use that to tidy up later. But before we get there, the next step that I think is important is probably to work on a little bit of highlights on this guy, specifically because some of the techniques we're going to cover here are going to be dry brushing, and you want to do that before you do the red because you don't want blue over the red. I do want to showcase a little bit of edge highlighting though, just to show you guys maybe what I might consider doing and give you some ideas, but if you're going for speed, dry brushing is going to be the way to go. Now for the edge highlights with this, we're going to be using actual real paint, not that the speed paints aren't paint, but traditional acrylic instead of the speed paints, because the speed paints aren't going to give you a highlight, they give you a natural transition, a highlight on the model, but adding more of it isn't going to really help you. So we have a few paints here to choose from, and these right here, we've got the blue and sky blue from Pro Acrylic. I think are going to be a little bit too dark. This blue I think is just too close in color, so it's out. This one is a little brighter, and if I was going for like a competition, I may actually use the sky blue first and transition into the lighter blue, the gray blue here. We've also got this faded ultramarine, which might have been a good option, but I find it to be a little bit on the kind of almost purpley side. I don't like that. I like the lighter looking blue here. Also, if you're going to dry brush, using the brighter stuff is going to work a little bit better anyway, because the dry brush goes on so thin. If you use stuff that's a little closer like this one, which probably would be fine, if you use that in a dry brush, it's going to be so subtle. So I find going with something a little bit brighter than you think you need if you're going to dry brush is going to get you where you want to be. But as I said, first we're going to work on a little bit of edge highlighting, and I'll show you guys some of how I'll approach that. So for edge highlights, I've gone ahead and prepped our gray blue, and I've got a little bit over here. Any kind of palette will work. The Monument paints, Pro Acrylic paints don't work quite as well on a wet palette. They'll be fine, but they tend to separate. And then overnight, they tend to like pool a lot of the water out of the membrane, oddly enough, through the sheet, and it doesn't hold, they don't last well overnight. So keep that in mind if you're using this on a wet palette. It's good for one session, but if you're trying to do it the next day, it usually becomes a bit difficult to get them going again. I usually just switch sheets and start over. So, but I want to show you what I've got here, and these were my other paints I was using. But I'm going to have that off to the side. Oh, here's a little tip. I've got a little bit of water here just to clean my brush in quickly, or to quickly mix a little bit of paint if it's feeling a little bit too thick, and I've mixed a little bit of water in that. I also like to use a little bit of matte medium, or not matte medium, like paint medium or something like that to help with the paints as well. So that said, we've got our nicer brush out, and we're going to grab a little bit of this paint. And doing edge highlights, there are times where one of the things I've seen someone say once was that you would never use the side of your brush. And let's go ahead and show you why that statement is wrong. Sometimes getting a crisp highlight, you can use the side of your brush. It just matters about the angle and the model. So here we're going to come in on this hand. That's a nice crisp area. Instead of trying to pull a straight line on that angle, we'll use the side of our brush here. And we'll just pull gently. Boom, easy peasy. And we'll come up here and we'll do the same thing. There we go. So there. I mean, that seems obvious, but someone once said in a stream I was in who was painting that you would never use the side of your brush, and that is inherently wrong. You 100% would do that if you know what you're doing. I think a philosophy that I've tried to adapt is to paint smarter, not harder, and using the side of your brush does help pull some highlights in some difficult areas. So we're going to do the same right here, and we're going to pull a little bit right there. Now I had a little bit too much paint, so while it's still wet, I'm going to come in with my wet paintbrush, and we're going to try and just get that excess off the mini. And in this case, we've still got our dark speed paint, so I can do a quick touch up right there on the knuckle where that was. All right, now that's just one little spot. So what I'm doing here, I guess I should explain as my first Battletech tutorial, so I'm a little scatterbrained. I'm looking for the natural high points on the model. When you do edge highlights, it's really easy, especially when you're new, and I did this a lot. It's really easy to try and edge highlight everything, and you don't have to. You're trying to find the high points, the highlights. Don't feel like you have to trace every panel. Focus on where the natural highlights would be and hit those. And if there's areas there wouldn't be, don't worry about highlighting that. You don't have to. You don't have to do any of this, actually. You do what you want to do with your model. But when you're doing highlights, you may feel obligated to start highlighting like up under the chest. You don't have to. If that feels like an area where the shadows would be so dark, there really wouldn't be any glints of light, don't do it. It's fine. And that's one of the beauties of the zenithal highlighting, is it lets you know where those natural areas are going to be, and you can focus your highlights in your painting on the areas where they should be. So in this case, I'm hitting the high points of the side there, and this really bright blue pairs really well next to the dark colors because it's so bright. It gives us that gradation, that transition between dark to light, and looks really, really nice. And one of the problems I have with painting is, as much as I may complain, I find edge highlighting sometimes to be a little therapeutic, and I start getting bogged down in the details, and then I realize a mini that was meant to be a play game piece ends up turning into something of a display piece with the effort that I put into it. So if that is the case for you, setting expectations for what it is you want to do with a piece is good, but if you find the muse and you find you're spending a lot more time on it than you wanted to, go for it. Have fun. It's your mini, and if you're going to get extra value out of your hobby, out of your painting, beyond just getting it on the tabletop, that's a win-win. It's paying dividends. So that's kind of the way that I view it. And it's sometimes hard to get into the mood to paint. And if you find it, latch on, get some painting done. In this case, we're working our way down the leg and hitting some of those spots. And if this had not already been primed once when I got it, some of these would be a little bit sharper. A little bit sharper. Not the end of the world. Or I say that I'm not not referring to the edge highlight, sorry, referring to the natural edges on the mini would be a little sharper. So, boop, boop. And here we're going to try and use the side of our brush. There we go. You'll notice a lot of times I don't change where my brush is at. I try and, as best as I can, shift where the mini is at. It's a little easier to change your angle of attack by rotating the mini versus trying to come at it with your paintbrush from a different location. So we're going to come in here, and we're going to hit the top of his foot. Give us a little edge there. And again, so trying to hit where the light would hit. So if the lights come in this direction, it's going to hit right here, and then cascade over. And we'll go ahead and hit the tops of his little toes. Boom. Okay. And sometimes I like to do a little bit of highlight that doesn't make as much sense, but this is a case where you might do something because it's going to look better or enhance an area. So this area underneath might not get hit with a highlight or with the light source as much, but I like to do some of these areas because it helps add some definition to a panel or to an area, and by putting that highlight there, we added separation between the top of the foot and the bottom of the foot, and I think that that's important and helpful. So There we go. Now, let's hit some other obvious areas with the edge highlight here and then move on to the dry brush. I don't want to sit here and edge highlight this whole model here. So if that is the case, and we're going to shift, if you were painting and you didn't want to highlight the whole model, where would you focus? What would you do? Take a moment to think about that while I work on this area, and then I'll tell you what I think is a good idea. Do, 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 do. Yeah, we're not going to go through that whole song. Nobody wants to hear me sing. That's not what they want. So if you were trying to do something quick and get a decent paint job without spending, hours and hours and hours, if you did want to do some highlighting by hand, one of the things that I recommend is hitting the extreme high points that are going to be very obvious. So like the bottom of the foot down here where we're working may not be quite as obvious of a spot visually when you look at it. People might not be as drawn to that. It's the areas at the top. So when you're focusing on highlights, focus on those if they're the only ones you're going to do, and hit the obvious ones that are going to have the most impact for your mini. So for example, on his chest here, we've got these nice panel lines that we can pull a highlight on, and those are going to be very distinct and very visible on this mini. The underside one not as much, which is the one I just did. I'm going to hit the corner here. And that is because this is not only the high point on the model, but it's also where like the eye is naturally going to be. People may look down at the feet, they may look at the decals on the sides of your Timberwolf and be like, yo, bro, this is a nice Beta Galaxy, bro. Or they might like I don't know why I just pretended like people who like Beta Galaxy are the bros of Battletech, because I'm a Battletech, I'm a Clan Wolf fanboy as well, but that was just kind of funny in my head. The point is they may look for identifying markers on the legs and things like that, but the focal point of your Battletech minis is probably going to be the torso and the cockpit area. And I think if I'm a betting man, that is probably why the Battletech community, I think in general, from what I'm seeing on the Facebook page, is so infatuated with jeweling on the cockpits, because it's such a focal point. You look at the top of the model, that's where the juicy squishy pilot is, the thing that makes the mech work. Without that, the mech's just kind of a computer that has no function. So that is the point where we all look. It's the part that we relate to. It's the resonation point, in that if we were inside that mech, that's where we would be. So the eye naturally gravitates toward it, and this one's got a really nice large canopy anyway. But if you're going to do manual edge highlights, focusing on areas up at the top where the eye is going to be is going to have maximum impact for anyone who's looking at your mini, and also look good on the table. And let's be honest, if you're playing games with these minis that you're painting, right, and you're trying to make them look nice, when people are looking at them, they're unlikely to be looking at the feet. So I will adjust the model here. If you're playing a Battletech game, in my head, I imagine like, this is the angle we're looking at. Yeah, pew, pew, pew. But in actuality, if you're playing Alpha Strike, you're probably looking at or Classic, probably looking at this direction, right? You're probably seeing a lot of top down because you're standing, or even if you're sitting, you're not looking straight on all the time, So you're always seeing some type of top thing, especially if you're at a gaming club and not sitting down. So that means that this point is way more important. It's the spot that the eye is going to be drawn to. So focusing your highlights on that area is going to give you maximum impact for a good looking mini. And for some of you that may make sense, and you may have already known that and be like, Justin, you're telling me something I already know. And for some of you may be like, hey, I wasn't sure. I thought with edge highlighting, maybe you just do everything. And that is not the case. Do not have to hit everything. Now I say that, and then I get in here, and again, I'm getting in the zone, kind of zen moment. I'm having a good time talking to you guys, and I'm starting to lose myself in the highlights. I used to live stream several days a week, and this is what I would do. I would do a lot of painting, I do a lot of talking, and yeah, I feel like that's kind of bleeding over here, where I've gone out of tutorial mode and I've gone into live stream, teach a little bit, and talk mode, and hopefully you guys are learning something. And if this tutorial is a complete dumpster fire, we'll do better on the next one. There's nothing on the channel that says we have to be perfect. All we want to do here is cast a little bit of a light into the darkness that is the Battletech community, and give people a place to call home, a place to enjoy the hobby together. Kind of like being a lighthouse for those who are seeking a cool community, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. It's part of why I'm running events at Nova. Nova 2023 will be back again. I'll be running a Battletech tournament there too. And that's kind of my thing. Like, put your money where your mouth is sort of thing. Like, there are things about the 40K community when I was a member that I didn't like. I could not change them despite trying to be involved. With Battletech, I have gotten a lot of traction with people, met a lot of cool people in the community, and I felt like, hey, I've got expertise, I've got tools, I've got equipment. I can do this thing, and I can help make a community, or not make, I can help grow a community and be a part of something, whereas in 40K it just felt hopeless, right? And with Battletech, I feel like there's a lot of people and we're just not organized together, and by helping provide content, I'm helping mobilize the masses, I'm helping grow the community, I'm helping spread a positive message, I'm helping to share with people what it is about the hobbying in general, not just Battletech, but hobbying in general, that I really loved, that I felt was lacking in the 40K community. Things that those players, it's a stereotypical, or stereotyping, but the things that I experienced locally, that I didn't enjoy, some of you guys may have had those types of experiences with gamers. I'm trying to help rectify that, help make Battletech go a direction that for me is better than just the win at all cost tournament side, the side that's faceless and only cares about winning, the side that doesn't care about the minis. I want people to care about the minis and care about each other and care about the community, so I'm trying my best. So that being said, let's throw a couple of highlights on his shoulder here and move on to that dry brush that I talked about. I think we've rambled quite enough here, and I think we give him let's see. Let's hit a nice one here. Now, this is not exactly where the light source probably would be, but let's hit one right on the front here. This is going to be one of the focal points. You're going to see these shoulders. They're looking straight at you. So let's hit that edge and make that nice and bright. Want that to pop. That's what we want. Swoop. Okay. You'll notice I brace with my pinky a lot. Sometimes that's not possible with the angle of the mini, or you might mess up paint, but I find bracing on pinky, or you'll notice here I do the same thing, multiple points of contact. Think like when you see a sports photographer or a marksman shooting or taking a photo, right? They can do them kind of freestanding and just hold their apparatus, but the more points of contact you have, the more stable you are. So you'll notice I'll use my pinky, or I'll brace on this, and I'll move very small amounts in my hand. I don't just stand here or sit here with my hands out in the open, just, that bracing point, at least for me, helps prevent brush strokes or errant brush strokes. It helps me be more precise, and helps with like methodical breathing. Like I can sit here and have a nice paced breath, right? And with the natural flow of the breathing, it helps me prevent that movement in your hands, your arms. As you breathe, your chest, expands and contracts. And I find that sometimes that can impact a kind of a free form kind of painting. And if I brace on the mini or on the paint handle, it helps prevent some of that. So think about that when you're painting. Now, what can you do to give yourself an edge and help with your precision? So we're just going to pull a couple lines here. I'm kind of pressing down and pulling back gently as I go. We just want to leave a little bit of paint. And then down here at the bottom, we're just going to use the side of our brush, and we're going to hit the edge of that panel. All right. So I'm liking where that's going. Those highlights really go a long way. I think to finish up with the highlights before the dry brush, we need to hit a few areas on this leg. We need to mirror those lines we made. Otherwise, it's going to look a little out of place. So we'll quickly get us some fast highlights on the side of his thigh here, which I think is going to be necessary given what we did on his calf. And we'll come over here. And you notice these aren't as clean because I'm going a little fast. I realize I'm rambly, and this tutorial might end up being way longer than anticipated. So I'm trying to get some speed going. And at the very least, if this was entertaining and not 100% educational, which hopefully there's something to be valued here, But if it ends up being more entertaining, at least it's something that hopefully for some of you is nice to throw in the background and to paint while you've got someone talking and hanging out, and a little bit like a hobby hangout if you don't have someone to hang out with at the time. And I find that sometimes you can be in a room full of people and feel all alone. That happens. I struggle with that frequently. And sometimes you can be in a room by yourself and it can be very, very loud, right? You know, you can feel like there's just a loudness in your mind. It's hard to quiet it. So for me, painting was a good way to exercise those demons, to mute the loudness in my mind. But sometimes it's nice to have a friend, and hobbying alone while being therapeutic sometimes can get a little lonesome. So I think that's why there are people who like to watch Twitch streamers like my community used to do when I streamed. And I figure maybe with this video, if it is less tutorial, which, I mean, I want it to be a tutorial, but if you're not here to learn stuff at this point, but you're just enjoying the rambling, perhaps, you know, this is my way of sitting down saying, hey, bud, what's up? Let's grab a couple drinks or some soda, some snacks. Let's sit here. Let's hobby. Let's have a little hobby time. So, I may never meet most of you. I try to be friendly, but you know, you can't meet everyone in the world. But for just for a moment, you've let me into your hobby space, your cell phone, your computer, your living room, wherever you're watching this, and hopefully you're learning something, or we're hobbying together, vicariously, sort of. You know. So that is kind of my thoughts with the rambling. So I think those highlights. You know what? Let's hit a couple more. Let's hit a few more. I know I said this, I get into the zone and I like edge highlighting, but if we're going to do that side, there's some highlights we just really needed to do, or this model is going to look really derpy. So we want certain areas to match, right? And if we're going to do those, I initially intended to do like one or two, and then I've just gone and I've highlighted and highlighted. And it's, like I said, it's a little therapeutic, and I've enjoyed it. And honestly, it's really helping, I think, pull this model together. So I felt like we really needed to hit a few on his, what was this, SRM 6. I'm assuming that's what it is. It has 6 tubes. Could be a bunch of SRM 2s, or, you know, some variation of that. Definitely not LRMs, not with 6 tubes. All right. Okay. I'm pretty happy with that. All right, so I skipped the front cap here because we're going to black that out, I think, and hit that with black and gray. I think that'll be a nice contrast on the blue. But I said I was going to teach you guys some techniques with dry brushing. So let's go ahead and get our dry brushes out and our paint ready to go for that. And we'll show you how to do some nice details on here quickly without having to spend a billion hours edge highlighting. All right, guys, so for our dry brushes here, my favorite ones for the price are the Army Painter Masterclass dry brush sets. Now, there are other ones that you can use, but I favor these. I think for the price, they are a hell of a value. Now, again, these were provided by Fortress Miniatures and Games, so big shout out to him. And if you like what I do with these, feel free to check them out and pick some up. If you happen to buy anything from him, let him know that I sent you. Now, there are some similar to this that are made by Rosemary and Company. Those aren't too bad. I still like these for whatever reason. I just feel like they do better. They're not, maybe there's less bristles, or maybe they're soft. There's something about these just works great. And then I've got the Artist Opus ones I haven't used yet, but I think they're a little bit expensive. So I think these are the way to go. I think this set is like 15 bucks. Now, you are going to tear them up, but if you clean them with your brush soap, which I've got a video on brush maintenance, the brush cleaner here from Masters, or the stuff from Pro Acrylic, the Unicorn Goop, I've got that as well. Actually, I've got some on my desk. I use both. This is my transport puck that I go back and forth to work with. The other one is my main one. But if you clean these after each use and you don't let a lot of paint dry in them, you're good to go. They'll get a lot of value out of them. So for this case, I like the big one. The small one is for like specific detail work. I'm debating on which one we want to use. I think maybe, my gut instinct is saying we use the big one. So we'll try that one first. Now, I've got our paint here. We're going to dip our paint brush in there, and we're going to work the paint into the bristles. Now, this was a bad choice of paper towel because they're both blue, and that's so hard to see. But I'm used to this, so we're just going to work in that paint into the bristles here. till we're starting to see faint traces on the paper towel. And one of the ways that you can test is on the back of your hand. You can see how much little bit of faint is coming off. And that's a good place to test first on your hand or on the back of your fingernail. Better to get paint on here that you can rinse off than to mess up your model. So that said, I think we're in a good place. And we're going to come in here and start working on some dry brushing. Now this stuff works really, really nicely because you get a nice fade when you're dry brushing with this style of dry brush. And one of the things that some of the other dry brushes do, the filbert tips, ones like this, they don't quite give you that same fade. Those are good, but I like these better. Alternatively, you could get some makeup applicators. We use these at work. These are Wet n Wild from Amazon. They work pretty good too, and they're very cheap. So that's my second favorite dry brushes, those Wet n Wild ones. So anyways, with the Masters ones, we're going to kind of go the direction of where we want the highlights to be. So we're going to start dry brushing in a downward motion, this direction, trying to be consistent and typically not go back and forth. We're going to go down. So down, pull, not down, up, down, pull. So we're pulling away and coming down because we want to have kind of makeshift highlights without hitting every area. So let's get going. You'll notice instantly the top of his shoulder there started to kind of get some makeshift highlights without having to work too hard for it. And these brushes are so gentle and you get such a nice fade on them without having to work too terribly hard. Now, it's not as crisp as standard by hand highlights, but for speed painting purposes or getting batch painted stuff done quickly, this is a godsend. I've got plenty of minis that have used this technique. Matter of fact, last year at Southern Assault 2022, my Beta Galaxy stuff placed first for painted, and a lot of the work was done with dry brushing. Now, I did do some manual edge highlights and some freehand for some of the details, and then the canopies I spent a lot of time. But don't sleep on dry brushing. It's not just a technique that people use because they're lazy. You can get some good detail with it too. So. And we're doing this first because if we hit some of the white areas, this is such a light blue, it's not going to be super noticeable. And if this was going over the red, we would notice it, which is not something that we want. Now, if we find that there's areas we're struggling to get into, we can skip and come back with a different paintbrush that's going to afford us a little bit of an easier opportunity to get in there with that smaller brush. If you start to notice some of the paint is coming on super faint or not at all, it might be time to resaturate your brush. Okay, so let's hit the shoulder, see what we can get. And this arm would be a nice one. Just see that? Super easy. Got some nice lines there. Now this side is also there's some texture from the primer. This didn't go on very well. Like I said, this guy was a second-hand mini for doing tutorial work with, so it was a little. He was not in the best shape now, but I think it's going to be good enough for getting us where we want to be. And honestly, it's probably not the end of the world because in a real-world situation with your military tech and the real-world mechs that we all know we have, the paint jobs probably aren't always pristine, is what I'm getting at. So it's fine. Things have been repaired. It is what it is. All right, so we're going to switch here. Now, I will store my paintbrush in some water here. I'm swishing out the end of it, and on a different paper towel, not the one that we're using for the dry brush, but when we're cleaning, I'm going to try and get some of that paint out before cleaning. I don't want it to dry in there, so work some of that paint out. And then I'll store it in some water so it stays moist until I can clean it. So now we're going to come in with this right here, our smaller dry brush. And we're going to try to get some of those areas that were a little bit more stubborn. Okay. So I'm using my hand. You notice it was kind of coming off too much. It was almost like I was painting and not dry brushing. So I think that consistency is a little better now. So let's get in here and try and target his chest area, areas we were struggling to hit before. nice, very nice, very nice. Hit his leg here, which was areas that we were struggling to get to because we couldn't quite get in there with the dry brush. There we go. Super duper easy. All right, so we'll come in and I think we're gonna mix just a smidge of white with that blue, just a little drop. I want to get a slightly brighter highlight on there with the dry brush, and then we will move on. So I've prepped a little bit of white with our blue here, and we're just gonna hit some real quick additional dry brush strokes here, just to get a little bit more. There we go. Like I was saying before, oftentimes you may want to go a little brighter than you think you need to with this, so that you can get the effect. Because when you start dry brushing, it goes on a little bit thinner than it does when you're applying your highlights by hand. There we go. I think that's just about going to wrap up what we're going to do for that. Now, like I said, this isn't as crisp or as clean as doing manual highlights, which we can see we're working on here. And this is dry brushing, but for speed painting a whole forest or whole company, not half bad. Not too bad at all. So now I'm going to prep some white. We'll come in and we'll tidy up this edge of the line here and start working on applying some red. Alright guys, so I have tidied up the white and I put black lines on the left and right of it to help separate it from the blue. I think it looks a little nicer, and I blocked in some black on areas just because it would cover up the white and make it a little easier to track what we're doing here. And I blacked out the base. And that was using the Grim Black from the Speed Paints. It covered pretty nicely. So we're going to try and speed through what we've got left here today. And we're not going to cover everything, so we're not going to get the decal on them. We're not going to do oil washing or basing or anything like that. But I want to get this guy from start to reasonable finish for you guys, so you guys can have an idea what you can do with these paints if you are on a limited budget or limited time. So we're going to come in and we're going to put in the red stripe here on our Mini. Now, sorry, I had a little thing here on my desk. I get my medium ready to go. So on the photo for him, it's blue, red, then white. So the red stripe's going to be on his inside. So we're going to come in and we're going to be using this blood red and slaughter red. And we're going to be using the blood red first. And we're going to be trying as best we can. Grab a different brush. Sorry, it's not the one that I wanted. Grab this one here. Grabbing something more for precision here rather than, okay, so we need blood red, all right. Precision here rather than large coverage, so grab a slightly smaller brush. So we're going to try and fill about half of our stripe here. Try and go right up to the edge of that black line, and by having that black line, it gives us a little bit of a buffer zone between the blue and the red, but we're trying to leave the white exposed. And I was thinking we were going to need that slaughter red, but I'm thinking with the coverage we're getting here, this may be good enough. Sometimes it's real easy to overthink it, but I think that stripe is coming out nice. So we're going to continue on with the blood red here and not worry about trying to blend the red. I feel like if we were doing a large surface area, perhaps we could worry about blending the red, but I think this is okay. Now we got a touch too far over, so I'm going to try and even that out a little bit while it was still wet. I cleaned my brush out quickly and tried to sop some of that up. Well, it's not 100% successful, so we're just going to come over and try and make that line as crisp as we can and move on. I'm going to try and get bogged down in any mistakes we make. Come up here and we'll fill in. Again, approximately looking for the halfway mark. And we'll start filling in the red portion of this. And right there on his kind of shin, it's a little bit more difficult because there's a deep recess and it's not a big flat panel, so not the easiest thing to get our brush in there and try and maintain a straight line at the same time. So doing the best I can to adjust the miniature's angle relative to my brush to get that red line we want. Okay. I think that is probably about as crisp as that is going to get. So we'll come up here and we'll try and do the same right here. Not quite saturated with enough paint. Going back, getting some more. Nice. There we go. Kind of like coloring, but with paint. There we go. And come in here. Now, like I said, if I was doing more detail work on this, this would be a little different. There would definitely be more edge highlighting. There would be an oil paint step. Obviously the decal, which one of the requests on my what should I do, or what tutorial should I do video was decals. So we'll probably use this guy as a guinea pig to show how I do decals at some point as well. We're going to tidy up right at the front a little bit. That was not super crisp, so also not a straight line there because of the way that this chest is designed. So we're kind of connecting two lines at an angle where they meet. So there we go there. And we're going to repeat that down the back as well. You guys don't have to watch me pull another line there, but let's see kind of what we're going for here. Obviously we showed this box at the beginning, but this is kind of where we're at. So yeah. And just like that, we've got the red line down the front and the back. And now it's time to come in and try and target this canopy. For the red line, I also want to mention that I was using the blood red, not the slaughter, or sorry, I was using the slaughter red, not the blood red that I thought I was. The blood red was a little darker. Moving on to his canopy, though, we're going to grab just a smidge of the grim black, and we're going to prep some of the surface here. This is with some of the medium. I kind of want the recesses in the area to be darkened out. So we're doing that. And then we're going to come in while it's still wet, and we're going to grab some of the blood red here, and we're going to mix some of this in. Okay, and again, while that is still wet, we're going to grab some Fire Giant Orange, and we're going to hit the top edge here and try and feather that in because we kind of want that transition into orange. We don't want pure red. There we go. And we're going to kind of gently feather the top there because there's white paint under there and we kind of want it to naturally get brighter, so we're kind of removing some of the paint there as we had blended it in. And that was super duper quick, and we've got that transition across the canopy. That actually came together a lot quicker than I thought it was going to. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to let that dry, and then we'll come with a little bit of white and we'll put a glint on that, so we've got a nice, what looks like light reflecting. Now with our white paint mixed up here, we're going to come in here and put some general like glints of light across the surface here. So we'll do the large surface here first. We'll just do like a little line. And then we'll do the same kind of thing, following the same curvature there. Right? And then we'll come up here at the top and try to generally follow the same kind of area. Right. And then we'll do a couple of dots. I generally like to do like little glints. Yep, that one didn't quite take. Boop. There we go. All right, so we've got our little cockpit. And one of the other things that we can do here, let's take a little moment to play around just a little. I mean, why not? We've got our paints out and throwing our paintbrush on the floor as we do. So let's take just a moment. We're going to thin down this white just a little. We want it to be a little bit more transparent. And let's make like a makeshift crosshair across the front of his canopy. I find with the Battlemaster, this is a fun place to do something cool like this. All right. And like I was saying earlier, this is going to be one of the focal points on your model. So if you do this, hopefully it draws the eye away from any of the details we ignored, because we were going for speed. And we want to make that crosshair just ever so gently brighter. So I'm crossing, there we go. Going across the front of that again. And kind of trying to imagine what the inside of his cockpit heads-up display might be showing. Maybe it's got like a little readout down here. Kind of looks like a little L. Whoops. Looks like a little L maybe. It's something down there. Maybe that's his list of weapons. We never know. And maybe we'll do one on the other side too. I think that'll look kind of neat. There we go. And while we've still got our white paint out, might as well hit some weapon tips. So one of the things I like to do is try to dot the inside of our little weapon here. So we get like what is going to be a bright spot for PPC in this case, I believe, or some other type of laser. In this case, I believe PPC. And I'm trying to spiral that out, and then I'll hit one of the corners. So I'll just get a little bit down here, so kind of give the illusion of the light reflecting off. And then we'll do something similar in these lasers here. They're going to be a little harder to hit the tips, so we're just going to fill the insides of the lasers on his center torso here with some white paint. Those look a lot brighter, so we'll come in and we'll hit those with the same paint. All right, and that way, when we come in later, we can use a little contrast paint, and we can fill those in and make them kind of look like they've got a glow to them. Now, one final thing to do on the canopy here, now that that's dry, I'm going to grab a little bit of black from the Grim Black speed paint. I'm going to do the best we can to try and outline the canopy and fill in the bars. So we're going to cover the bars. Now for you, if this is your mini you're working on, hopefully you are following along easily enough and taking some notes on things you want to do, but you don't have to do it the same way. So I'm blacking this stuff out because I don't have the time right now to film and do metallics or anything. This is a perfect place though to do like a metal bar, metal reinforcement across the top of the canopy if you want a little metallic. So don't take anything I'm showing you as the gospel, so to speak. Just take it as a set of guidelines, and perhaps it'll give you a foundation to work from if you're new. If you aren't new and you've made it this far, either you're raging in the comments about my newbiness for what I'm trying to achieve here, or you just enjoy listening to me ramble. Hopefully it's the latter and not the former. I know that for some skilled artists this may be going over stuff they already know, and for new artists it might be nice, or perhaps for someone who's a veteran it's a nice refresher, or just good background noise, which is kind of my hope, is that no matter who's listening that they enjoy this. Otherwise, what's the point? What am I doing? Alright, so I'm going to come in here and do the best I can. These are a little difficult. Also, I will tell you this, trying to paint on camera versus in person without a camera is very different. The angles at which I'm trying to paint, so you guys can see what I'm doing, are very different than what I would be doing by hand without a camera above me. Can be a little difficult to get the angles I want on camera at the same time as getting them. We're doing okay here, but sometimes it's hard. You gotta think. When you're painting, you're not usually thinking with a camera in your face. One of the other things I like to do, this one's going to be a little bit harder, is to trace the outline of the canopy as well. So black line the edges, or you may hear this as black lining or pin washing. In this case, we're just trying to trace the outline, and with this black contrast paint it's not too bad. And if you mess up while it's still wet, just come in and tidy it up. I find that this is one of the things that really helps make the canopies pop, particularly on like a Mad Cat. You do this canopy stuff you're doing, whatever it is, whether it's speed canopy like this, or you're doing some crazy detailed jeweling, and if you blackline and there's that separation between the canopy and the rest of the model, I find that it makes it pop out and look a little nicer. So we're going to touch up as well areas on the gun here that I've messed up. So keep touching it with my hands here. And as an example of other things you can do on the model, I'm not going to do the whole thing because we're not going to be oil washing today, but you can also come in and, oh, I've messed up some of the paint there. You can also panel line the rest of it. So like right here, we might panel line up under there. And that helps add some definition, separation. You might come in here and do a black line right there, right there. That helps add some separation between the panels. Just like that. Now, like I said, we're not going to do this to the whole model, but this is something you could do. I usually don't, except for specific areas like the canopy. This is something I would use an oil wash for. And finally, before we move on, we're going to touch up a little spot I messed up. So right here, we had a little mess up. Just do the best we can to cover that back up. I've rubbed off some of the paint with my hand. Unfortunately, that happens sometimes when I'm working on minis. You don't realize where your fingers are rubbing, and if the paint's not fully dry, or if you rub the same area multiple times, the paint will start to come off. So come in here and just try to tidy up right in there. And I've got some just standard medium to kind of blend that up so that it doesn't look so jarring that it's different. And it may still look a little jarring because it's got a different hue to it because we've already dry brushed. So. But that being said, we are going to transition now, and we're going to finish up the black areas and the weapons, and I think we're going to get ready to call this guy done. Obviously, there'd be oil washing we could do, decals or basing, but for the basic tutorial here, I think this will give you guys a pretty good idea of what you can achieve with these techniques and these paints. Alright guys, so we are going to come in and we're going to tackle some of the black now. Highlighting that. So first thing we're going to do is grab a little bit of Pro Acrylic bright neutral gray. We're not going to use a whole lot of this by hand. We're going to do a lot of dry brushing, but we're going to come in and we're going to try and hit the high point on our canopy and just do a quick little highlight. Doesn't have to be the whole thing, just trying to be consistent. And there we go. I just wanted something to add a little separation between the canopy and the bar there. We're going to come in and we're also going to put a quick highlight on top of these laser tubes. They're going to be very hard to hit with a dry brush, so we're going to highlight the top edge of them. I think that's going to help make them show up a little bit. And we'll come in and we'll hit like this little line here. And if you find that's too bright, you can also hit that with a little bit of Nuln Oil or wash, but I think that that is reasonably fine. We're going to come in and we're going to hit the edge of this. We're also going to come in and do a dry brush, but I want that edge to be a little brighter than what the dry brush might afford us. Okay. We'll hit some lines like that. All right. And we can come in here and also accent our little rocket pods here. Assuming that's what these are. I guess they could have been some kind of lasers. Oh, had a little mishap there. It's hard for me to see down in the hole there because I can't get the angle right. So I think we're going to skip trying to hit the tips. I can't do the I can't get the angle very well to see them properly with the camera, which is unfortunate, but I need to come at them at a specific angle with the paintbrush to hit what I want to hit, and I could do it off camera and you guys wouldn't see it, but with us trying to do something for speed, I'm not terribly worried about it. But doing it on camera, I'm going to be having to do like something like this and you're just not going to see it. So we'll come back to that in a minute because we'll do some highlights inside so we get some line and some definition. We'll do a quick line kind of on our barrel here. These are going to be our kind of crisp, quick highlights. We're getting towards the end of the mini here, and we're trying to get her wrapped up quickly. Got to be too fancy. Just get it done. And as we get towards the end of our mini here, we're going to grab a little bit of dry brush and get our black areas looking a smidge better. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this dry, and then we're going to hit it with the dry brush. If you start to dry brush early and you hit that while it's wet, you'll start smearing paint, and we do not want that. So 1 second, quick little movie magic. Boom, that's dry. Before we hit that dry brush, though, we are going to do a couple of highlights inside here. I can't quite get the angle I want for the missile tips there, but we will hit the top edge on some of these like housings because it's going to add some depth or definition internal, which without it you can't really see some of what is in here. And if you want to spend a bunch of time, you could also highlight again the like missile tips. You could hit the bottom edge of the little circle housing they're in. You could do a lot of stuff, but we are just hitting the edge of the housing so we get a little separation, so when you look at it, it's broken up. And that is what we want. So we're going to flip this so I can get that last edge. Give me a little trouble from the angle I had. There we go. Okay. And we're going to hit as well, just to mirror the highlights we had on the other side, we're going to hit the bottom edge down here. Our rocket pod. And again, we're trying to see where the light would hit. So if the light's hitting this top corner, it's also going to hit that bottom corner as well. So that's kind of what we did that. Bright highlights, going to stand out really nicely across the table. So that said, next up is going to be our dry brush step. And this time we're going to be using one of the Wet n Wild dry brushes. We're just going to get some of this bright neutral gray from Pro Acrylic. We're going to saturate our brush. Use the back of our hand first, or the palm. Right now my hand's right saturated with paint. And we're going to come in and we're going to dry brush. Since we did this stuff with wet paint sooner, or more recently, we're going to start over here. So we're just going to go kind of, going to try and minimize hitting the model. We don't want to hit that. It's not the end of the world if you do, but we're trying to focus on the black areas. If you hit the blue, you end up with like a little bit of a gray, which is not the end of the world, but trying to focus. Trying to focus. There we go. Easy peasy. And then we'll come over here. This one's a little bit more difficult because the model, and we'll just hit the edge of our little rocket pod. There we go. And if you don't like that, you find it to be a little too gray, you can come in with a little bit of thin down like Nuln Oil, black wash, or some of the Grim Black thin down speed paint from Army Painter, and put a very, very thin layer down on this, and that will give you a nice transition so that it's not so bright. But with this, I don't think that is too bad. So the next step is we're going to come in and we are going to do our tips of our guns. So we want something bright for the blue, which is going to be like a PPC. So I've got my paint swatches here. We're trying to find a bright, bright blue. Or see, that blue is too close to him. I think we want more of a green blue or like aether blue. Actually, that actually might not be too bad. That's kind of like a plasma-y thing. I don't mind that one. I feel like that might not be blue enough. Let's see what's on the, okay, so PPCs. All right, so it's a very bright blue, and then he's got green in here. So let's find the green at first, and then maybe we'll just do some blue there, which is fine. I think for the green, perhaps we do this green. I think that's going to contrast well, and this is the orc green. So let's give that a shake. And won't take very much of this. We should be able to just fill the insides of that with our paint. And that should, let's see. All right, so on my thumb, that's a little bit, the opacity is not quite where I want it. So always good to test off the model first. So we're going to grab a little bit of medium, mix up some of that paint till we're happy with it. All right, so I've got a little white area here. Let's test that. All right. Okay, I feel like we're getting somewhere with that. So let's give this a shot. Here we go. Here we go. There we go. And there we go. Boom. Not too bad. Got our green tips there. And now we need to do a blue one. And I think this is not where we want to be. It's still kind of green. It's not... Actually, you know what? That is different. You know what? Let's use this because... and that is the plasma. The model is super blue, and I want a little less blue, so we're going to grab the plasma, plasmatic bolt, which is a little... Actually, you know what? Let's grab plasmatic bolt in magic blue, and let's mix those together, like 1-to-1, and see what we get. These little paint lids are great to have around for things like this. I think we might get a little bit closer to a color that we want here. Because I don't mind a little hint of the blue, because, like, you know, plasma-y, or excuse me, a little hint of the green, but I'm not sure I wanted like that much. So we'll give that a little mix. Let's grab a little bit of the medium here. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm liking where that's at. Let's give it a little test. Yeah, it's a nice color blue. It's very plasma-y. I like that. I like that. So for future reference, Justin, when you're editing, remember this, as well as everyone in the who's watching. You mix these 1-to-1, we get a nice plasma color, which I think is going to be great for PPCs. All right, so let's go ahead and should be able to fill the tip of his gun in here, and that ought to get us going. And we're going to saturate the whole edge here just to get a little bit of blue. And so that has quite darkened the end. So we're going to come in with a cleaned paintbrush, and we're going to sop up some of the paint to expose the barrel, or the tip, the bright spot. So now we've got the plasma-y blue and the green dots there. So I think that's looking really, really nice. And while we're at it, since I've mixed up paints, let's go ahead and grab a little bit of this medium. We're going to go like 3 parts, doesn't take much, and of the paint and the Grim Black, and we'll hit it with 1 drop, not a lot, just a little. Give that a little bit of a mix here. Even that might be a bit much on the black. All right, and no, I think that's fine. Okay, so we'll come in. I was mentioning this before. Let's come in, and since we're wrapping up the model here, let's just hit those areas that we hit with the dry brush and the edge highlight, and that just knocks that edge highlight and that dry brush down just ever so slightly. It's not quite as in your face. Okay, and we'll hit his gun as well. Yeah, there we go. Nice. Honestly, it was probably worth doing just to get a little extra detail without having to work too hard for it, because we're going to get a little bit of a gradation, so to speak. Probably should have done this before I did the plasma or the PPC, but not the end of the world. Okay. All right, yeah, I think that was a solid choice of things to do. I think that knocks the stark contrast of the bright gray down just enough. So to finish this guy up, as I've mentioned before, a few things that I would do: oil wash, decal. We'd put the Davion decal on there, and then I would do the basing. I would also gloss varnish the canopy if I'm not worried about photography, and I would varnish. So we're going to hit this with the varnish and the canopy and then call it good, because that's all we're going to have time for today. So we're going to do a quick cut. When we get back, he will be matte, and then we'll put the gloss on the canopy, and we'll see what it'll look like prior to decals and basing. Okay, so this guy is now matte varnished and dry, and I think the final step was, I mentioned, was putting on some gloss varnish to the canopy to finish out our little project here. So let's grab a little bit of gloss varnish, and this may not translate over as well on the camera. This is a little thing I do on miniatures that aren't for photography type competitions or something. And even then, like the photography with the gloss isn't too bad, but the problem you have with the gloss and photography is the flash. This is reflective because it's shiny, so it makes it hard to take photos. In person, the thing that the gloss affords you, which is really nice, is it's got that gloss shiny sheen, which for a canopy that's meant to look like glass, you get that nice overall look. And I think that is often worth it depending on what it is you're doing. And I think for this tutorial, this is a good idea. There we go. There we go. Now, one of the things that I have heard people complaining about with these Army Painter speed paints is bleeding. I had no real issues trying to blend them together on the surface. When I was going over it with other colors, I didn't really have any major bleeding issues. It wasn't too bad. I guess maybe it'd be worse if I was doing more, but I honestly think that this worked out well. These were pleasant. It was nice. I think there are some colors that are better than others, but I think this one, with the goal of trying to be the Battlemaster from the cover, that's not too far off. Our red's probably not quite, or our orange-red canopy's probably not quite the same. This is also more of a purple-blue versus this, but I think our blue is fine. If you were worried about that canopy, we could have glazed over to a different color, but I think that's not too bad. I think in hindsight, if I was going to do anything else on this to rectify something that we have done here in our tutorial, it probably would have been this barrel tip. If this was my model, I would go back and fix this. It's not the end of the world, but I needed to have adjusted the opacity on that a little bit better because it's a little too dark. It was good while it was drying, and then it dried. It was just too dark. I should have adjusted the opacity or go back in with white and redot really fine and do a little white dot on the bottom edge to give that illusion of heat or brightness. But I think if we'd adjusted the opacity first, we wouldn't have to do that. So I don't want to get bogged down trying to continuously perfect this. I think that we set out to do what we achieved, which was to use some speed paints to see what we could do with this guy and minimize having to use extras. Now, for today's video, we started out with Hylor Blue and Cloudburst Blue. Those are our primary colors for the armor. Then we've got our Slaughter Red, which was the red for the stripes. We used Fire Giant Orange and our Blood Red for the canopy. And then we tied that all together with a little bit of the Speed Paint Medium. And for you guys who are in YouTube land, I'll get these all tidy together so it looks a little bit cleaner, almost like I'm trying to be a professional, or at least be entertaining at the very least. We used a bunch of little apparatus for mixing, mostly water bottle lids. Save those; those are great for this sort of thing. And then we also used a little bit of gray blue from Pro Acrylic and bright neutral gray for our gray highlights. If you're interested in what I used for my my varnishes, the secret sauce for me is to hit stuff with Mecha Varnish first, and then hit it with the Ultra Matte Varnish from AK. I find that this doesn't go over gloss very well, and I typically gloss varnish stuff for decals, then I'll try and matte. So I almost always do Mecha no matter what first, then this. In this case, I didn't gloss varnish first, but I still hit it with the Mecha and then the Ultra Matte over the top. Now once it dried, and then for the canopy, I used Liquitex High Gloss. You could use any gloss varnish, that's just what I had on hand, and that's what I used. Now for any of you who have followed along with our previous videos, you'll notice some similarities. These are slightly different blue than this fellow. He's a bit more gray blue, they're a bit more bright blue, but we have taken essentially these concepts here, and instead of airbrushing, which is what these were, we hand applied it. Now our hand swatches showed us, and I'm sorry folks, I realized my microphone was in the wrong place. It probably sounded weird, maybe now I sound better. I apologize. Man, I was almost like I don't know what I'm doing. You'll notice the hand swatch here wasn't super good, but on the model, I think that we got much better blends, and I think that that is because we have a larger surface to work on and not just a flat surface. And I wasn't just trying to like layer it on and pool it, I was actually trying to move it and maneuver it, and I really like how this guy turned out. I think for a speed paint video, for this guy being done, I'm not sure how long this video took once it's stitched together, but if I wasn't actually trying to film it and I was just trying to do this, I could probably bang out several minis to this quality pretty quickly. If I was trying to up the game, up the visuals on it, I would come in and I would finish the tips of the missiles. I would put some more extreme edge highlights on here. Even after the dry brush, I think I'd come in with a much brighter blue and hit some more extreme edge highlights. But for a tabletop or tabletop plus standard, I think this guy looks great. Needs a decal, needs basing, and he will be done. So those of you who have made it this far, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. Sound off in the comments below if there's anything that I could have explained better or other things that you would like to see, or if you just enjoyed this and enjoyed my rambling. Maybe you worked on painting something while you were listening to this or watching this. Maybe you painted what I'm working on. In either case, if you have an Instagram or Discord and you want to share what you've worked on, share those links, pop in the Discord and tag me, share your Instagram links, let me see what you're working on. If you worked on something that wasn't this, but you listened to me ramble while you were painting, share your art with me. Share it with others. Put it in the comments. Let's see what you're working on. Whether you're a new painter or an award-winning painter, let's check it out. Let me see what you're working on. If you guys want to see more content like this, hit that like and subscribe button. Let me know the things you would like to see. But as always, I've rambled long enough. It's time for me to relax. Time to end this video. As always, you guys keep painting those models. Keep rolling those dice, and I will catch you guys next time.